So if we take a look at the intensive wrestling camp, it's probably unsurprising given that, the main focus was on developing mental skills and life skills that we saw some positive outcomes in terms of psychological skills and characteristics. And that was shown both in the larger sample, large group quantitative data, but also in the smaller group qualitative data as well. And I'm not going to talk you through a big list on the screen for both, but just in terms of the qualitative group data, some of the themes that were coming out were enhanced confidence, work ethic, which included being able to work harder, being able to stay disciplined when working on not just wrestling, but also on particularly after the camp on things like school, personal empowerment. So being able to take responsibility and accountability for actions, enhanced thought processes around understanding of self and reflective ability, and also some interpersonal skills as well, such as leadership and to some extent altruism in some of the participants as well. Can I have the next slide, please, Fika? But there were some individual differences that emerged, even in that smaller qualitative sample. And depending on some of the psychological antecedents that the wrestlers had arriving to camp, meant they were better able to take advantage of that wrestling camp environment. Now, I'm not going to talk you through that wrestling camp environment model in the beginning because length of the presentation, but when arriving, we kind of judged each one of the wrestlers based on their readiness for the camp. So that's their psychological and physical readiness to take on something quite so intensive, their openness to learning, and their reflective ability. And depending on how much of this readiness, openness, and reflectiveness that they had arriving changed or allowed them to take advantage of that wrestling camp environment. So the individual at the top, if you read the quote, you can see is quite a reflective individual, and that's how he was when he arrived. And that meant if we look at some of the qualitative themes towards the end, he was able to articulate those more clearly and how he was applying them maybe outside of wrestling and into some other aspects of his life. Whereas the athlete at the bottom, who was pretty closed off to learning and less reflective, got a little bit less out of the camp. Next slide, please, Fika. So if we start to some of our research and think about how we can tip the balance in our favor in terms of whether talent development environments not being inherently good or bad, but making sure that we make the best of them. We're going to share over the next couple of the slides some things that we might want to think about in order to take advantage and use them in positive ways. So the first for me is kind of an understanding and commitment by coaches and organizations, clubs, that actually their talent development environments are possibly an ideal, and I would say an ideal opportunity to help young people meet the developmental demands that Fika outlined at the start of the presentation. And kind of alongside that, we need to make sure that we're doing that in a developmentally appropriate way. The want and the need to learn from us because of who we are and the things that we offer, those doors that we might open, means that there's an opportunity, but there's also a challenge. We may need to make sure we're doing it in a way which is supportive of them. So here I'm going to suggest, what a participant needs based on literature and what we understand about their development, but also their individual needs. There were differences in those two participants on the last slide that I talked about, and how can we help them meet them where they are, and also what your talent development environment demands of them. If there are certain things that are going to be demanded of them, then we should probably focus on helping develop those skills first so that they can thrive in the environment rather than being diminished by it. Next slide, please, Fika. And part of doing that then, or the next thing I'm going to suggest, is being intentional. And when I say being intentional, I mean taking ownership of the fact that we want to make our talent development environments a positive place and actually develop people in a healthy way. So I've kind of given some examples here of some things that we can do, from environment curation, which is maybe slightly more time efficient for us as coaches, because I know that we're all very busy, down to deliberately designed activities, which might take a little bit more confidence, competence, and time to do. So in terms of environment curation, it's not just the stuff we do on the mat in wrestling or in the pool or on the pitch and those kinds of things. It's all of the experiences that we put together. And we need to think about, how we can use those to, one, help develop the skills, but two, create an environment that people feel safe and want to come to. And part of that is us as coaches ensuring that what we do aligns to what we say is important. So if we're going to say that time management is important and design an environment in that way, we must also be on time. I think we can better leverage naturally occurring events. We're going to have poor officiating when we're coaching. We're going to have wins and losses. We're going to have a teenager that, can't self-regulate in the way that we want them to. Instead of reacting emotionally to that, if we've planned for how we want to use those moments to help them learn, I think we're being more intentional, and that will help as well. And then again, we can deliberately design activities depending on what we think is necessary, but that should run alongside our technical and tactical practices. Underpinning those three things, though, we need to, if we want it to be a life skill, discuss how it applies outside of sport and discuss that transfer. Provide opportunities for practice, because we know it's not going to happen overnight, as with any skill. And going back to those individual differences, really understand that they exist and how we might adapt what we want to do for the individuals that we have in front of us.